In this episode of Fallout History, Lore, and Setting, we continue exploring the history of Vault Tec by overviewing the lives of several overseers. These individuals, appointed by Vault Tec executives, would serve a critical role, ensuring that the vaults were properly managed and that the many unethical experiments planned would occur without a hitch. Discussing the lives of these pre-war leaders will serve as a segue into discussing the many experiments conducted throughout the post-war years of the Fallout timeline. If you enjoyed learning more about the history, lore, and setting of the Fallout universe, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Episode 2: Notable Overseers of Vault Tec. Who is Bud Askins? In hindsight, I do regret not mentioning him in the last video, as he played one of the most critical roles for Vault Tec and the vaults primarily featured in the show. These vaults being Vault 31, 32, and 33. Prior to joining Vault Tec, Bud worked for the company known as West Tech as part of their product management team. He was one of the many minds behind the designs of the T-45 power armor, first released to the American public in 2067. After spending a decade at West Tech, Askins was hired by Vault Tec and worked in the Human Resources Research Department. Bud Askins would be described as a corrupt, sleazy, and single-minded individual solely devoted to preserving his vision of corporate culture. He consistently pursued the implementation of what he called workflow optimization of management timelines. This visualization was based solely on the principle of destroying the competition by outlasting them. Bud's grand design was to create a way to ensure that Vault Tec's dominance remained well after the Great War. And this is where the Societal Preservation Program comes into discussion. Originally directed by Dr. Stanislaus Braun, this program focused on preserving a small slice of the United States population, but more importantly, monitoring the various social experiments that would take place in the vaults. Working with Babs Howard, Bud Askins would figure out a way to ensure that loyal Vault Tec employees were around well after the competition had been cleared away. His grand design for making this dream a reality is found in Bud's Buds, the executive training program. Bud's Buds was a plan of Askins to keep Vault Tec alive using a network of vaults for a eugenics program that involved mixing graduates of Vault Tec University and Bud's junior executive program with the dwellers of two other vaults that would serve as breeding pods for future Vault Tec managers. Located in Santa Monica, California, Vaults 31, 32, and 33 would serve as one of the most elaborate social experiments conducted by Vault Tec. And Bud Askins would become the overseer of Vault 31, the very same location where various graduates of this training program would be cryogenically frozen and activated to serve as overseers for Vault 32 and 33. On the television show, Bud Askins is first seen in the 6th episode titled The Trap. We first meet him during the filming of a promotional ad starring Cooper Howard. Bud awkwardly introduces himself to Howard and just makes the most awkward impression ever. Remember earlier when I stated that Askins was behind the T-45 power armor? Well, that set of armor was riddled with design flaws, and when it was used in combat, it resulted in the death of various soldiers. Cooper Howard, a veteran soldier who served in the Marine Corps, witnessed these flaws firsthand and reminded Askins that several of his friends were killed due to the problems of the T-45. This exchange reveals a lot about Askins. Here was a guy that was so focused on pushing out a product that he completely ignored the dangerous problems one could experience using the product. He is a person so committed to reaching his goals, he does not care how he endangers others. In many ways, Askins embodies the corrupt nature of not just Vault Tec, but the whole corporate culture that can be found studying the pre-war society of the Fallout timeline. In order to oversee the activation of his junior executives, Bud would have his brain transplanted from a human body to a robotic shell. This is revealed in the last episode of Season 1, titled The Beginning, when Norm ventures into Vault 31 for the first time and discovers various cryogenically frozen residents, the same ones that would serve as future overseers. In his robotic form, Askins would continue to periodically activate his junior executives when the time came. Now that we explored the life of Bud Askins, it's time to shed some light on several other overseers that came directly from Vault 31. Let's begin with Hank McLean. Prior to the war, McLean served as the executive assistant to Barb Howard, and eventually he would become one of Bud's buds as he entered chrono-sleep on the eve of the war. Hank was released officially on August 9, 2268, and was sent to Vault 33. 3 years later, he would be elected as overseer and carry out overseer duties until being kidnapped in 2296. Since Vault 32 and 33 served as breeding pods for the overseers, Hank ended up marrying a woman by the name of Rose. Together they would have 2 children, Lucy and Norm. Rose would end up fleeing Vault 33 with her 2 children to go to Shady Sands. Upon finding this out, Hank had his children taken from Rose and relocated back to the vault. I don't know about you, but I was pretty shocked to find out that Hank McLean was the man responsible for the nuking of Shady Sands. Shady Sands was once a thriving city that came into existence around 2161. This was a thriving community that was both self-sufficient and had well-established agriculture, along with Brahmin herds. This community would serve as the first capital to the NCR or Northern California Republic, forming up around 2189. From here, the city would expand and develop, reaching a population of around 3,000 citizens by 2241. This city had, well, everything: a power plant that provided residents with electricity, defensive walls to protect from outside threats, a sewer system to dispose of waste, a uniformed police force to keep peace and order, a fully functioning government with a legislative and executive branch. But by the 2280s, we would see the downfall of this once thriving community. After Hank informed Vault Tec of the Shady Sands town, the company from a private vault launched a nuclear bomb on the town of Shady Sands, killing everyone in the process, including Rose McLean. To cover up the fact that Rose died, Hank would lie to both his children, Lucy and Norm, and tell them that she died during a famine in the vault. But in the very last episode of the series, episode 9, titled The End, it is revealed that during the final confrontation between Motiver and Lucy, that Rose was turned into a ghoul as a result of the nuclear bombing. So why was Shady Sands bombed? Competition. Vault Tec's intentions behind Project Shelter and Project Safe House was to outlast the war and rebuild society in their vision. This newly formed NCR represented the biggest threat to that vision. Even in the future, Vault Tec wanted to retain their monopoly on the survival of the human race. Betty Pearson was another one of Bud's buds. She was one of the executive assistants for Barb Howard. She was the one who originally introduced Hank McLean to Cooper Howard as well. She would enter Vault 31 on the eve of the Great War and would be unfrozen on February 15, 2246, and sent to Vault 33 to serve as overseer. She served this role until retiring in 2271 when Hank was appointed. Although not an overseer anymore, she stayed on the Vault's governing council with Vault residents Woody Thomas and Reg McPhee. By the end of Season 1, she is once again overseer, and her role in the Vault Tec experiment is further speculated for the audience. In the first episode titled The End, she originally approves Lucy's request to marry and couple with a male from Vault 32. This is of course the episode which saw Vault 33 residents fight off a raider attack that resulted in Hank McLean being kidnapped by Lee Motiver. Throughout this entire scene, Betty is absent. Now that might seem like a small detail, but it does clue us in that Betty might have had some liability. When Rose McLean became a ghoul after the nuking of Shady Sands, her Pip-Boy at one point was lost. Keep in mind that Pip-Boys act as keys to enter the vault. A person could not open a vault door without one. At least that's how the current lore spins it anyway. One must wonder what happened to the Pip-Boy. One theory speculates that Lee Motiver found the Pip-Boy and used it to open up Vault 32. But this is mere speculation so far. While I can't confirm that Betty had a hand in the attack on Vault 33, I can state that she did everything in her power to help Hank cover up the death of his wife and the real truth behind what happened to the residents of Vault 32. For this analysis, let's reflect on the events showcased in Episode 4, The Ghouls. In Vault 33, both Norm and Chet are punished for assisting Lucy to leave the vault. The Vault Council decides to make Norm's new job feeding the prisoners captured after the Raider attack. This is why in Episode 4, he is seen serving the prisoners leftover cake from the wedding. He learns through talking to one of the Raiders that the residents of Vault 32 were not as innocent as everyone thought. This prompts Norm to carry out an investigation. He attempts to access Vault 32 records on his terminal, but he's denied. He then decides to recruit his cousin Chet, and the two sneak into Vault 32. It's there that they find a dead cornfield and various dead remains of residents. One particular body is shown sticking a fork in a toaster. Meanwhile, a television program loops in the background, a video showing mice in an experiment killing each other due to living in an overpopulated environment. This might suggest that Vault 32 was overcrowded and could not provide enough food for residents. Whether this fact provides insight on the experiment is not clear, but we also find various graffiti on the walls saying things like "death to management" and "we know the truth." In the overseer's office, they stumble upon the remains of Ian Jackson, who from the looks of things was tortured by residents before dying. Next, Norm manages to access the overseer's computer to look up vault records. He discovers that the vault door was open from the outside with the very same Pip-Boy registered to his mother. In Episode 5, titled The Past, Norm questions more and more about how the Raiders were able to get the vault door open. Him and Chet return to Vault 33, where Norm checks out the inner vault door to Vault 32 and 31. He and Chet discover the remains of two vault dwellers from 32, with the words "we know what's in there" written in blood. Meanwhile, Vault 33 is having an election to appoint the next overseer, and magically, Betty wins by a 98% majority. Later, heading back to the inner vault door, Norm discovers that all vault overseers came from 31. As her first official edict, Betty decides to transfer various residents from 33 to 32, Chet being one of them. But before doing so, she leads a tour of the current residents, which is a stark contrast to what both Norm and Chet saw. The bodies of the dead vault dwellers are now gone, and all the destruction and writing on the wall has been cleaned. When commending Betty on the cleanup job, Norm asks what happened to his mother's Pip-Boy, and Betty simply replies that it was buried with Rose some time ago. Of course, we know this is a lie. I speculate that Betty, under orders of Vault Tec, was commanded to do this resettlement as a way of continuing the breeding program and ensuring that Norm and Chet would be separated. Ian Jackson is the only overseer mentioned in this video that we know the least about. Simply, he was another one of Buds, a graduate of the Askins training program. It's not clear when he became overseer, but he was unfrozen just before Betty became overseer of Vault 33. He would die during a rebellion that took place in the vault just 2 years before the Raider attack, leaving Vault 32 unsecured for when Mortimer and her goons arrived. Steph Harper. I initially didn't pay too much attention to Steph. At the beginning of Season 1 of Fallout, she was simply Lucy's pregnant friend, helping her get ready for her wedding night. She helps fight off the Raider attack the night of the wedding, and in the process she ends up losing her husband, Bert, and her eye. She is one of the few residents of Vault 33 who agrees with Norm that the Raiders should be executed as revenge for her late husband. She later ends up taking Norm's cousin, Chet, as her new boyfriend, just before going into labor and giving birth to her first child. Like Betty and Hank, Steph was also a member of Buds. As an executive assistant, she was selected by Bud to participate in the Vault experiment that would work to create super managers to oversee Vault 33. It has yet been revealed what role she played in the long string of events that took place between 31, 32, and 33, but nonetheless, she would be appointed as the next overseer for Vault 32 by Betty herself, thus indicating that she had some involvement with Vault Tec's shady underdealings of the past. Albert Lee Reese was the overseer of Vault 106, located in the Capital Wasteland just south of Vafru. Prior to the war, Loris was a member of the Psychological Research Department and one of the leading engineers at Vault Tec. He would supervise the experiment of 106 that would study the effects of psychoactive drugs within the air filtration system of the vault. Just 10 days after the vault door closed, these drugs were released on unsuspecting vault inhabitants and caused many residents to grow disoriented, delirious, and violent. This led to a massive riot in the vault, which left the security staff overwhelmed. Here was an overseer who, above everything else, was fascinated in how people ticked when exposed to drugs. He probably represents some of the worst of Vault Tec's intentions. Lawrence believed that the right amount of drugs could work to make people happier and more productive members of society, despite having deteriorating health conditions, as evidenced in his journal in the Boston Bugle. Understanding how people tick and how we can make them tick better, bet happier, and become more useful members of our community is hugely valuable. This particular quote provides more insight into the more sinister intentions of Vault Tec. This company wanted to reshape the world and rebuild society. And you best believe that they were not above pumping drugs into Vault residents to get the most use out of them. Dr. Stanislaus Braun would become the overseer for Vault 112, located in the southwest region of the Capital Wasteland. Before the war, Braun served as the director of Vault Tec's Societal Preservation Program, along with serving as the head of Future Tech, the department of Vault Tec that would specialize in advanced weaponry and sciences. This was the department behind the famous GEC, or Garden of Eden Creation Kit, a device capable of forming a fertile landscape in a post-apocalyptic nuclear age characterized by dead soil. As famous as the GEC was, Braun would become even more famous for his work in preserving human life. Braun was able to develop virtual reality pods that worked to keep occupants suspended in a simulation where they would not age or die. Upon being selected as overseer for Vault 112, it was intended for the vault to have 85 occupants that would be suspended in a virtual reality suspension for the duration of the experiment. Braun and Vault Tec wanted to preserve a slice of pre-war America through the design of Tranquility Lane. This would allow residents to live the perfect life without fears or worries. On board with the original Vault Tec simulations, Tranquility Lane would work as a recreated American suburb, where Braun would frequently kill and revive residents in the simulation. Within the simulation, Braun adopted the identity of a little girl by the name of Betty to keep residents unaware of his presence, all except Old Lady Divers, who alerts the lone wanderer to what is happening. The only way to end the suffering of the inhabitants is to activate a failsafe inside the abandoned house, which will result in everyone but Braun dying. Vault 112 stands out for other reasons besides the Tranquility Lane simulation. It's one of the only vaults to not be affected by radiation or mutated creatures. It's also one of the only vaults to have the original inhabitants still residing there. And while 85 residents were originally selected to take part in the simulation, there are only around 13 lounges seen. What happened to the other residents? It's never revealed, and we can only speculate what happened. Lloyd Hawthorne would become the first overseer of Vault 4. Before the war, Hawthorne was a Vault Tec scientist who specialized in the effects of radiation on human DNA. We first meet him in the episode titled The Trap, during the filming of a Vault Tec commercial where he and his family explained that they would be staying in Vault 4 for a 5-year trial period before the war could commence. Located in Los Angeles, California, Vault Tec's experiment for Vault 4 centered around examining the performance of a society governed entirely by science, with no limits on their control or decisions. Vault 4 will become the home to some of the most grotesque human testing. We learn from the series that the many current residents of Vault 4 were once the victims of Vault Tec's experiments, resulting in many inhabitants having hideous mutations and after effects. Throughout the post-war years of the Fallout timeline, the scientists at Vault 4 would lure in unsuspecting wastelanders to be used as test subjects for experiments. These experiments would often include crossbreeding human subjects with those of mutated animals. And this is why creatures known as the Gulpers came into existence. After one experiment, which resulted in a woman giving birth to a school of Gulpers that ended up eating her alive, The inhabitants of the vault rebelled against the scientists and killed them, along with Hawthorne and his wife. The vault residents would establish a democratic system and institute a policy of accepting refugees from the outside world. The victims of Vault Tec's experiments would be placed in stasis pods on level 12 of the vault until they could come up with a cure. What's interesting about Vault 4 is the fact that this once sick and depraved location where scientists ran amok experienced a revolution that made it into a thriving underground society that is dedicated to actually helping others. Vault 4 would serve as a refuge for the survivors of Shady Sands after the nuclear bombing. In my opinion, these individuals discussed in this video are probably the most significant overseers when discussing the Fallout timeline, as they were not only around during the pre-war days, but also managed to stick around and greatly influence the events seen in both the video games and TV shows. And I have no doubt that there are plenty of overseers that deserve some mention as well. But this video is probably long enough as it is, and I do plan on doing a future video that provides more insight on the Vault Tec experiments conducted after the war. I just want to take this time to thank every one of you out there for watching this video and listen to me ramble about the Fallout timeline. I am generally new to producing Fallout content, and I will admit this is new ground for me, as most of my content covers video games of the 6th console generation. However, since I love the Fallout series so much, I decided to throw my hat in the ring in providing you, the viewer, who might not know as much about the Fallout series as I do, all they can related to the history, lore, and setting of the series. If you enjoy my videos covering the history, lore, and setting of the Fallout universe, make sure you subscribe to the channel. This is your big homie Bob signing off. Stay safe out there, y'all.